Night had already settled over the eastern Mediterranean, soft and heavy, when the small Templar convoy first appeared as dim silhouettes upon the water. Their vessels drifted toward the Lebanese coastline with the calm, deliberate pace of a procession rather than a voyage. Lanterns swayed gently from the yardarms, casting long ribbons of gold upon the waves, but little else moved. No wind pressed against their sails, no gulls circled above. Even the sea, known for its restless temperament, seemed unusually subdued, as though some ancient instinct guided it into silence. The men aboard spoke in low tones, if at all. Most had spent the journey in contemplation, fitting for those whose lives were built upon discipline and devotion. They were seasoned Templars, warriors of a strict and ascetic order. But tonight even their practiced composure appeared thinner than usual, as if worn by something unseen. Many had found their thoughts drifting to things they could not fully articulate, an unease that settled not in the mind, but behind the ribs, somewhere close to the breath. At the prow of the lead ship stood the commander assigned to this passage, Sir Gautier de Morimont. At first glance he appeared wholly unremarkable, neither imposing in stature nor ostentatious in manner. Yet those who served under him spoke of an undeniable gravity that seemed to gather around him like a mantle. His stillness carried weight, his silence carried intent. Even now, as he gazed toward the darkened shoreline, he seemed less a man observing the land, and more a figure waiting for something expected, though unspoken. The coastline revealed itself slowly. Soft dunes lay scattered along the shore, followed by rising embankments covered in sparse winter brush. Farther inland, olive trees stood in quiet clusters, their silvered leaves catching faint traces of moonlight. A distant monastery, the last vestige of a once thriving coastal community, sat atop a modest hill. Its stone walls were marked by age and weather, its windows dark. For centuries it had served as a place of refuge to passing pilgrims, but lately word had spread of its abandonment. It was toward this lonely structure that Morimont's gaze drifted again and again. The landing was quiet, their boots sinking softly into damp sand. The air felt unusually heavy, not with storm, but with chill, a coldness that seemed to settle deeper than skin. The knights formed small clusters as they unloaded supplies, speaking carefully, almost dutifully, as if unwilling to fracture the calm around them. Their mission, at least the one known to the broader order, was simple: escort sacred relics from Jerusalem to the fortified abbey near Antioch. The artifacts were said to be fragile remnants of early Christian communities, deserving both reverence and protection. But none of the knights could quite articulate why the convoy had been reduced to so few men, or why the timing of the journey, midwinter with coastal raids common, felt strangely inconvenient for such a task. It was only Morimont who moved with the assuredness of one who understood more than he revealed. He disembarked last, stepping onto the sand with steady deliberation. For a long moment he studied the land, as though reacquainting himself with an old memory. The men waited respectfully, though some exchanged uneasy glances. They had grown accustomed to his quiet manner, but tonight there was something else about him, something contemplative, almost heightened, as though he listened for a voice none of them could hear. The monastery awaited them on the hill, framed against the night sky like a sentinel long forgotten by its builders. The ascent was gentle but prolonged, winding through brush and stray stones. Their torches cast flickering arcs of orange across the path, revealing cracks in the earth shaped by seasons of wind and neglect. When they reached the monastery gates, the wooden beams groaned under Morimont's hand. Inside, the courtyard lay still, carpeted in a thin quilt of dried leaves. An overturned clay vessel near the entrance bore marks of long abandonment, its faded glaze chipped. The Templars moved with care through the outer cloister, their footsteps echoing softly beneath weathered archways. Morimont paused before entering the main hall, studying the dark beyond the door. There was a sense, faint but undeniable, that the building held its breath. Even the men felt it, an intangible tension, though nothing suggested danger. They raised no shields, they drew no swords, yet their movements became instinctively measured, as though stepping across hollowed ground. Inside, the hall revealed remnants of its past purpose, fragments of frescoes along the walls, a cracked baptismal font, scattered manuscripts abandoned by those who fled long ago. The air smelled of stone and age, yet something else lingered beneath it, a subtle, metallic trace that none could quite identify. Morimont traced his fingertips along the edge of a faded mural. An image of a winged figure holding a spear downward. It was a common enough symbol across several Christian traditions, but the depiction felt older, more archaic than the typical iconography of the region. The lines were sharper, the stance more rigid. Time had chipped away most of its meaning, but some deeper significance seemed locked within its form. The commander stood motionless before the mural far longer than etiquette allowed. The men waited in respectful silence, though they shifted subtly, sensing a strange communion between their leader and the image. It was as though Morimont sought something in the faded pigment, something familiar, perhaps remembered only in fragments. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable. He instructed the men to prepare the monastery for the night. Some set up sleeping quarters in the side chambers, clearing dust and fallen debris. Others tended to the horses in the large outer courtyard, where the wind still refused to rise. The torches continued their steady burn, their flames remarkably tall and smooth, as if untouched by any draft at all. Hours passed in quiet labor until everything was arranged with the precision the order required. And yet, even after the preparations were complete, none of the knights found rest comfortable. Conversations drifted briefly, then fell away. The silence of the place pressed faintly on their senses. Not oppressive, but persistent, like the residue of something unseen. Morimont took no rest. He paced the cloister methodically, his steps slow, his gaze attentive. On occasion he paused, turning his head slightly, as though some distant sound had reached him. But each time he continued forward without comment. To the men who watched, his movements resembled a thoughtful vigil. To Morimont, it was something else entirely. For somewhere beneath the surface of consciousness, somewhere beyond logic or memory, there echoed a subtle call. Not a sound, not a word. Something quieter, older than language. A presence stirring faintly in the spaces between heartbeats, recognized only in feeling. And though he did not yet understand why, He sensed that the stillness of this night marked a beginning rather than an end. A beginning long prepared for him. A beginning he had not come to meet by chance.
The monastery greeted the morning with the same unnerving stillness that had settled over it the night before. Dawn's first light crept across its stone floor in slow, pale bands, illuminating motes of dust that hovered motionless in the air. Even the usual chorus of gird song, which typically accompanied sunrise along the Levantine coast, seemed absent. The knights noted this in their quiet glances, but not one spoke of it aloud. For men accustomed to war, silence was no stranger. Yet the silence here carried a depth unlike anything they had known, a kind of watchfulness, as if the earth beneath them listened more attentively than it should. Morimont had not slept. When the others emerged from their chambers, they found him standing beneath one of the open archways of the cloister, gazing out toward the inland hills where a faint mist clung to the ground. The first light touched the white mantle of his cloak, but the commander did not shift or react. His expression held the same quiet intensity as the night before, a stillness so complete it felt almost ceremonial. The men respected this, though some worried over it. Morimont was known for discipline and contemplation, but not for sleepless vigils. A few exchanged wary looks, wondering if the weight of their covert assignment pressed more heavily upon him than he let on. Their morning rituals proceeded with the orderliness expected of Templar discipline. Prayers were spoken with calm intonation, armor was inspected in silence, supplies were checked and reorganized. The men moved through their routines with meditative rhythm, each action precise, unhurried, and practiced. The mission that awaited them, officially, required a measured pace. They would travel northward toward Antioch, following roads that wound through valleys shaped by centuries of trade, conflict, and pilgrimage. Along these routes, fortifications from various periods dotted the landscape. Crusader towers, Byzantine outposts, and older ruins whose origins had long since slipped from common memory. But the Morimont's private instructions diverged sharply from the path laid out to the men. He alone bore the charge given him by the Grand Master in Jerusalem, a quiet, unrecorded investigation into a collapsed outpost once occupied by a little-known sect. The ruins, barely marked on any surviving map, lay inland several days' travel from the coast. Few had heard of the place beyond local rumor, and fewer still could say who had lived there last. The Templars had no official claim upon it, no strategic reason to send men toward it. Yet Morimont had been summoned privately, given sealed orders, and commanded to speak none of them. The knights knew none of this, but they sensed something in their leader's manner, a directed focus, as though he listened not to the world outside, but to a compass fixed somewhere within. They trusted him, but trust did not erase the subtle tension that threaded between them. Before they departed the monastery, Morimont stepped into the abandoned chapel that adjoined the main hall. The chamber was small, its vaulting low, with only a few remnants of painted saints remaining on the walls. Dust lay thick on the altar. A cracked chalice sat on its side, forgotten by those who had fled years ago. Morimont approached the altar with a deliberate calm, his gauntleted fingers brushing lightly across the stone surface. Though the knights did not follow him inside, they paused as they passed the doorway, compelled by an unspoken curiosity. They saw him lower his head briefly, as if in silent reflection. No one knew whether he prayed, no one asked. The departure from the monastery was marked by the same quiet that had accompanied their arrival. The horses responded obediently, though their ears twitched with mild agitation. The absence of wind persisted. The air felt dense enough to shape with one's hands. As they descended the hill and returned to the coastal path, the sense of watchfulness seemed to follow them for a time, then fade gradually into the morning haze. Their journey that day took them along well-worn routes, passing olive groves tended by local farmers and small villages built from sun-baked clay and stone. Children paused in their games to watch the armored riders pass, whispering among themselves. Traders with donkeys laden with spices or cloth stepped aside, bowing slightly in acknowledgement of the Templars' presence. The region, though marked by the lingering scars of conflicts, still throbbed with the vibrant hum of daily life. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Shepherds guided their flocks across terraced hills. Women drew water from ancient cisterns, their laughter carrying faintly across the fields. These familiar scenes provided a gentle anchor to the men, easing their unease as the hours progressed. But Morimont's attention remained distant. At midday they rested near a shallow stream, allowing the horses to drink. Some knights removed their helmets to cool their faces in the water, while others quietly mended straps or adjusted their gear. A few conversed in soft tones about the path ahead, thinking of the known abbey near Antioch, its libraries and the relics they believed they were escorting. But Morimont sat apart, under the shade of a lone cedar tree. His gaze fixed on the water, though his eyes seemed focused on something far beyond the visible surface. A few of the men noted this, but none ventured to disturb him. The commander's thoughts drifted not to the stream, nor to the path ahead, but to the memory of a dream, one that had recurred in fragments, gradually assembling itself over the past few weeks. The imagery remained obscure, a circular chamber carved into stone, a faint crimson glow emanating from a surface he could not identify, and whispered words spoken by a voice that felt both foreign and familiar. At first he had dismissed the dreams as trifles of the mind, shaped by the ordeals of campaign and command, but the recurrence, the clarity, and the strange certainty they imparted had unsettled him in ways no earthly threat ever could. He felt drawn toward the outpost to which he had been assigned, not as a commander following orders, but as a man following a summons he could not name. By late afternoon, the path narrowed and curved inland. The coastal breeze, when it existed, usually carried the scent of the sea deep into the hills, but today the air remained oddly scentless. Even the sun felt muted, softened behind a thin veil of cloud that dimmed the landscape with a gentle pallor. As the convoy rode deeper into the inner territory, the terrain shifted from fertile groves to more rugged expanses. The hills rose in gentle undulations, covered with coarse scrub and scattered boulders. The earth took on a reddish tint in places, though the men attributed it to mineral deposits common to the region. By early evening, they reached a small fortified guest house maintained by Christian locals. The structure had provided shelter to many travelers over the decades. Its stone walls, though worn, stood firm against the rising dark. The keeper greeted them with respectful bows, offering food and fire with the quiet hospitality of a land accustomed to hosting soldiers, monks, and wanderers alike. The knights settled for the night with gratitude, easing out of the saddle and allowing their bodies to rest. A fire crackled in the central hall, casting warm light upon their metal armor and weary faces. Bread, olives, and lentil stew were served, simple fare, but comforting. Conversation picked up slightly, subdued but warmer than it had been at the monastery. Some spoke of past campaigns, others reflected on distant families. A few wondered privately about the strange stillness of the coast, though none pressed the matter. Morimont remained more reserved than usual, though not withdrawn. He listened to his men, offered measured responses, and maintained the calm demeanor that had long made him trusted among them. But even as he sat with them, the call within, quiet and insistent, pulled at the edges of his awareness. Late in the evening, after the fire had burned low and the men had begun to settle in for sleep, he stepped outside alone. The sky above stretched clear, stars arranged in their ancient patterns. The air was cool, and for the first time since their arrival at the coast, the faintest whisper of a breeze touched the land. Morimont closed his eyes. The breeze carried no scent, no sound, yet within its gentle touch he felt the faintest sensation of recognition, as though the land itself acknowledged him, as though the path ahead awaited his arrival.
The next morning, the convoy left the guest house at a steady pace, following a route that bent northward along an old Roman road. The stones, worn smooth by centuries of travel, lay half-buried beneath wind-blown soil. Portions of the original paving still showed faint chisel marks, signatures of a world that once stretched from Britannia to Syria with unbroken logic and engineering precision. The Templars were accustomed to riding through history, but today the ancient stones felt unusually significant, as if they pointed not merely toward a destination, but toward an event long in motion. The landscape shifted gradually as they advanced. The fertile coastal plains gave way to coarse grasslands, dotted with basalt outcroppings. These dark stones were remnants of older volcanic formations that locals believed to be cursed or sleeping. Shepherds rarely brought their flocks near them. Travelers kept to worn paths with almost ceremonial care. It was near one such outcropping, an upthrust ridge of black stone, that Morimont called the company to a halt. His men watched in silence as he dismounted and approached the ridge with deliberate steps. The basalt rose in a jagged arc, like the spine of some ancient creature. On its surface, patches of rust-colored lichen formed irregular patterns. When the commander reached out and brushed his fingers across the stone, a faint ring echoed, far too resonant for ordinary rock. The men exchanged uneasy glances. "Commander," one knight ventured, choosing his words carefully, "this terrain is not marked on our maps." Morimont did not turn. "It is older than the maps." He said nothing further, leaving the men to wonder how he could speak with such certainty. They resumed riding, cutting east toward the low mountains that bordered the Orontes Valley. Along the way they passed the ruins of a small Byzantine watchtower. Its foundations were cracked, its upper levels collapsed centuries ago. Yet beneath the decay, the structure's layout remained unmistakable. A circular chamber at its core, surrounded by narrow corridors. One of the knights, trained in architectural survey, noted quietly that such circular designs were atypical for Byzantine military posts. They were more often found in pre-Christian sanctuaries or ancient astronomical sites. Morimont paused at the ruins only briefly, but the flicker in his gaze suggested recognition rather than curiosity. By midday, the company reached the foothills that concealed their true destination. Here the terrain grew harsher, steeper cuts of rock, narrow passes and dry creek beds. Sparse pine trees clung to the slopes. The air was cooler. The horses slowed instinctively. It was then, as they rounded a narrow bend, that the ruins finally appeared. A collapsed structure lay ahead, only partially visible through the rugged terrain. What remained of its outer walls rose in fractured angles, like broken ribs emerging from the earth. The structure did not resemble the European or Byzantine style. Its design was older, sharper, carved with a precision that suggested deliberate geometry rather than simple fortification. This was the site known in local memory as Al-Khalat al-Harama, the Red Fortress. The Templars dismounted in solemn silence. The soil around the ruins bare a faint reddish tint, unlike the mineral-rich earth seen earlier. This color did not fade near water nor disperse when disturbed. Some of the knights knelt to examine it. The texture was normal soil. The hue was not. There had been massacres throughout the Levant. Many battlefields carried such stains. Yet none of the men sensed the familiar markers of conflict. No rusted arrowheads, no bones, no collapsed barricades. The red hue seemed inherent to the land, as if it emerged from within rather than being spilled upon it. Morimont approached the main fracture in the wall, where ancient steps descended toward darkness. He paused, scanning the entrance with a steady, disciplined gaze. His expression betrayed no fear, only a startling degree of certainty. "This is where the outpost fell," he said quietly. One knight replied, "To whom did it belong, Commander? No records mention it." Morimont answered with unexpected precision, "To those who shaped metal in ways long forgotten." The men tensed. It was not the content of the statement that unsettled them. It was the tone. The commander spoke as someone recalling a fact long known, not recently learned. Still, seasoned soldiers followed orders. They formed a line, lit their torches, and prepared to descend. The air at the entrance felt unnaturally cold for the region. Torches flickered in a strange rhythm, their flames elongating as though drawn inward. The descent was steep, carved directly into a single continuous mass of stone. The steps showed no tool marks. As they moved deeper, the walls became smooth, almost reflective. Symbols appeared along the passage, simple geometric shapes arranged in patterns that did not resemble any known script. They were older than Latin, Greek, or Syriac inscriptions the men had seen, older than Nabatean carvings common in the region. The formation of the symbols, perfect circles, intersecting triangles, and spirals, hinted at precise mathematical intent. At the bottom of the descent, the passage opened into a vast chamber. The architecture of the chamber defied conventional categorization. The ceiling rose in a perfect dome carved from a single piece of stone. Faint lines ran across the surface in radial symmetry, converging at a central point directly above a raised pedestal of obsidian. The pedestal had fractured long ago, its sleek surface marred by a long fissure, and upon its center lay a shallow depression where something once rested. Morimont stepped forward. He surveyed the chamber with the calm of a man walking through a memory rather than a ruin. Every detail seemed to draw him deeper, every angle, every symbol, every echo of geometry long abandoned by known civilizations. "It began here," he murmured. The men looked to one another, waiting for explanation. Morimont continued, speaking with measured clarity. "Centuries before Rome, before the kingdoms of this land, there were artisans who believed that metal held memory, that iron shaped under certain rites would retain echoes of those who wielded it. This place was one of their forges." The knights could not determine whether the commander spoke from scholarship or something stranger. None had known him to study ancient metallurgy. None had heard of such artisans in any chronicle. Before they could question further, a sudden vibration rippled through the chamber, subtle but unmistakable. Dust drifted down from the dome. The torches flickered violently. A deep hum resonated through the stone. Not loud, not sharp. A low, almost breathing sound, as though the chamber itself inhaled after centuries of stillness. The pedestal pulsed faintly with a dull reddish glow. Instinctively, the men raised their shields, though no adversary appeared. The air thickened, pressing inward on their lungs. The glow brightened. Morimont did not move. "It answers," he said quietly, as if expecting the reaction. The glow intensified, spreading across the fissure like liquid fire. And then, a thin sheet of metallic crimson rose from the depression, as if rising through water, though the surface below was solid stone. The men froze. None had ever seen metal behave so. Morimont stepped toward it without hesitation. "Commander!" one knight cried, but his warning went unanswered. The crimson sheet hovered a moment longer. Then it began to fold, curl, and ripple, alive, but obeying some geometric logic instead of instinct. It extended in a single line, then split into branching filaments that reached toward the knights like searching limbs. The Templars drew steel. The filaments recoiled, not from the swords, but as if recognizing them. They retracted swiftly, converging into a single stream that flowed toward Morimont with impossible speed. Before the men could intervene, the stream struck his breastplate and dissolved into it, absorbed, as though consumed by the metal. The chamber fell utterly still. Morimont opened his hand. A faint red sheen now coated his gauntlet. "It has begun," he said. No one knew what he meant, yet every man sensed that the world above had already changed.
Night had long settled over the Levant by the time the riders reached the hilltop monastery known in older records as Deir al-Khawf, the Monastery of Dread. The name, though softened over the centuries, appeared in several reliable ecclesiastical inventories compiled during the reign of Baldwin II, each noting the site not for its spiritual significance, but for its peculiar history of abandonment and brief, troubled reoccupation. Chroniclers such as Michael the Syrian and later William of Tyre both commented on these small monastic outposts scattered along the mountain routes, lonely structures built for solitude, frequently reclaimed by hermits, and just as frequently deserted after unexplained misfortune or incursion. The Templars knew of such places. Many had stood silent upon the landscape long before the first crusading armies arrived. The monastery here, however, was different in one important respect. Local records kept by Greek Orthodox scribes mentioned an archive within its walls, a modest but carefully maintained collection of medical commentaries, translated fragments of earlier Syriac annals, and travel reports from monks who had journeyed between Antioch and Jerusalem. These documents were said to have been relocated repeatedly, surviving raids and earthquakes, moved from cloister to cloister until finally ending up here. It was these manuscripts, or rather the specific references within them, that had drawn Grand Master Everard de Barras to authorize the reconnaissance in the first place. According to preserved correspondence between the Templar leadership and the Patriarchate of Jerusalem in 1147, the order had recently intercepted mention of a substance once stored in the region, not a relic, not an icon, but a compound described only as the red solution. Written descriptions were vague, perhaps intentionally so, but several emphasized its use not in ritual, but in the treatment of wounded soldiers centuries before the crusading era. Some passages attributed it to Nestorian healers, others to medical schools associated with early Islamic physicians who refined Greek and Persian techniques. The most curious fragment, however, claimed the mixture had been carried across Mesopotamia by an unnamed military physician fleeing one of the Abbasid civil conflicts. His last known refuge, according to the document, had been a monastery fitting the description of Deir al-Khawf. The Templars, who maintained a surprisingly scholarly network of informants among Eastern Christians, believed it possible that remnants of this knowledge still survived. Some historians suggest the order's interest stemmed from its growing need for improved battlefield medicine. Others propose the motivations were more administrative, documenting local knowledge for the order's archives, which were known to be extensive. Whatever the purpose, several letters in Templar record catalogs show clear authorization for the acquisition of materials of ancient medicus craft, supervised by personnel who could assess the safety and relevance of the findings. Nothing in these letters hinted at danger. only urgency. Thus the riders had come, expecting a quiet structure and the possibility of useful manuscripts. Instead, they found the gates broken, the courtyard unusually still, and the wooden torches lining the wall burned down to their last charred stubs. The scent of oil and something sharper, possibly resin or burned disinfectant, lingered in the air. The men dismounted in silence, scanning the yard as they moved toward the central hall. Reports from the few monks still present, as later recorded in Templar administrative notes, described a series of events that had begun 2 nights prior. A wandering healer, elderly and frail, had arrived at the monastery's gate requesting shelter. His robe had been torn, his pack nearly empty. The monks, accustomed to travelers seeking refuge, admitted him. He claimed to have once studied at a medical school in Haran, though his accent placed him farther east. When questioned about his journey, he refused to elaborate, offering only that he carried something of scholarly value. The monks noticed that the man kept his satchel close, refusing to let it out of sight even while eating. At night, he worked alone in the small scriptorium, consulting their manuscripts. They heard him pacing the corridors, muttering as though arguing with unseen interlocutors. On the second evening, the monastery's steward heard glass breaking inside the scriptorium. When he approached to check on the visitor, he found the door barred from within. A sharp chemical odor seeped into the hallway. The old man's voice rose in distress, repeatedly whispering that the mixture had not been meant for open air, that its preparation required a stabilizing agent he had lost en route, and that without it, the compound would heat itself to madness. Shortly afterwards, he lost consciousness again. The monks moved him to the infirmary. 12 hours later, his condition worsened. According to the monastery physician's notes, preserved in Latin translation within Templar archives, his breathing became shallow, his pulse irregular. The discoloration on his arm, initially mild, deepened into a hardened stain, as though the substance had adhered beneath the skin. There were no signs of infection or fever. The physician's notes described the clinical features plainly, without embellishment, and his experience suggested no known illness that matched what he saw. By dawn, the traveler had died. The monks, at a loss and concerned for their safety, sealed the scriptorium and contacted nearby Templars for assistance. Their message explained only that a foreign physician had arrived bearing some form of unstable medical preparation, and that the mixture had been accidentally released inside their archive. They requested help in safely removing or analyzing the residue. They did not know what else might have been contaminated. All this the Templars learned upon arrival. Their task, initially bureaucratic, had now become investigative. They entered the scriptorium carefully, documenting the state of the room. Burn marks traced irregular patterns along the stone wall near the desk. The broken satchel lay open, the remnants of vellum scrolls within stained dark red. Several manuscripts belonging to the monastery were damaged, though not beyond recovery. A few intact fragments contained marginal notes written in a script none of the monks recognized, possibly an Eastern Syriac hand or a regional variant rarely encountered. The Templars collected the fragments, sealed them in protective cases, and prepared a formal report. Everything followed standard archival protocol. The men were experienced, calm, and methodical. Nothing recorded in these early documents suggested they expected further danger. But the strange substance had not yet revealed its significance. Its true implications would unfold only after the samples were brought back to the Templars' main commandery, where the chain of events that historians still struggle to explain would begin.
The Templar riders departed the monastery before dawn, their horses moving at a measured pace along the winding path that descended toward the coastal road. The sealed containers carried in their packs remained stable, wrapped in treated cloth, and enclosed in wooden chests reinforced with iron clasps. Their procedure followed established guidelines. Any manuscript or unknown substance retrieved from remote monastic sites was to be transported first to a local commandery laboratory for cataloging, translation, and medical inspection. This protocol, referenced in the administrative compilations known as the Cartoulière Générale, was not uncommon. The order maintained a disciplined approach to the collection of information, especially in regions where Greek, Arabic, and Syriac knowledge intersected with Latin scholarship. The men believed the investigation complete. Their reports described the incident with precision: an elderly traveler, a mixture of uncertain medical origin, accidental exposure, death, following symptoms that could not be classified. The tone of these early documents remained restrained. There were no signs of panic among the scribes, no suggestion that something unprecedented had occurred. To them, the situation appeared merely unusual, not alarming. The commandery chosen to receive the materials lay near Tortosa, one of the most fortified Templar centers in the region. The site was well documented: a coastal stronghold with a functioning infirmary, a scriptorium staffed by bilingual clerics, and a modest but reliable medical workshop where visiting physicians, Armenian, Greek, and occasionally Arab, exchanged techniques in wound treatment, herbal stabilization, and battlefield hygiene. Contemporary records emphasize the order's cooperation with local experts. The Templars valued practical knowledge above all, and they were capable of recognizing the sophistication of Eastern medicine even when cultural boundaries remained tense. The journey from the monastery to Tortosa took less than a day. According to the patrol logs, still preserved in Latin summaries, the transport team arrived without incident. The chests were delivered directly to the senior archivist, a man named Matthias, whose notes remain among the clearest surviving documents from this period. He described the residue as a hardened film along broken vessels, with a metallic odor consistent with compounds used in cautery. He made no dramatic claims, only careful observations. His initial assumption was that the substance might have been a primitive hemostatic mixture, possibly related to iron oxide preparations used in some early surgical techniques. The notion seemed plausible. Several Arabic medical texts from the 10th and 11th centuries mention coagulating agents derived from mineral compounds. It was entirely reasonable that the traveler had carried an unstable variant of one such formula. The archivist assigned the material to two categories: unknown medical preparation and possible translated fragments requiring linguistic review. This routine classification marked the moment when the story, still grounded in normal procedure, began to shift. Within 24 hours of the material's arrival, the Templar infirmary received its first report of an unusual injury. A young knight returning from patrol presented with a discoloration on his left hand. The man himself believed it came from handling rusted chainmail straps during a river crossing earlier in the day. He described a mild burning sensation that faded quickly. The infirmary physician, accustomed to ordinary abrasions, cleaned the area and applied standard herbal paste. His notes described the mark as reddish, like iron dust rubbed into the skin, but neither swollen nor warm. The case was recorded and dismissed as minor. Later historians reviewing this record were careful not to exaggerate its importance. The Templars frequently dealt with equipment-related injuries, and the region's humidity caused metal corrosion that often stained the skin. Yet what made this case significant was its proximity in time to the arrival of the unknown compound, a coincidence recognized only in hindsight. The second incident occurred the next morning, when one of the archivist's assistants fell ill. The assistant, a skilled scribe familiar with Arabic manuscripts, had spent several hours handling the stained scroll fragments recovered from the monastery. He had worn gloves, as protocol dictated, and the documents had been carefully brushed and isolated. His symptoms were mild: fatigue, dizziness, and an unusual dryness in the throat. The infirmary physician initially diagnosed heat exhaustion. The climate along the coast was known for its variability, with sharp changes in wind and temperature that frequently caused discomfort among those who worked long hours indoors. Yet his condition did not improve. By the end of the day, the assistant developed a discoloration on his fingertips, not unlike the mark seen on the knight's hand. He believed it to be a reaction to the cleaning agents used on old manuscripts, which occasionally contained mineral residues. No one suspected a connection to the compound. The association only emerged later when the chain of events had become unmistakable. Meanwhile, the manuscripts recovered from the monastery, the ones stained with the dark, rust-colored substance, were found to contain annotations in two distinct scripts. The original text, likely Syriac, appeared to discuss a mixture used in emergency treatment for deep wounds. The annotations, however, belonged to a later hand, possibly Arabic, bridging the earlier medical knowledge with updated formulations. This was not unusual. Many manuscripts in the region bore evidence of layered scholarship, reflecting centuries of scholarly exchange. One fragment in particular caught Matthias's attention. It referred to a mixture described as reddening in heat, a compound that could seal blood swiftly, but must be kept in stillness lest it awaken. The language was metaphorical, common among early medical writings, where chemical reactions were often personified. The archivist made notes to compare the fragment with known treatises by physicians such as Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, both of whom wrote extensively on cauterizing agents and mineral-based treatments. His interest grew more academic than practical. He believed the fragment might fill a small gap in the region's medical history, linking local healing traditions to broader Islamic and Greek influences. There was nothing alarming in his analysis, no suggestion of danger, only curiosity. It was on the third day that the situation changed from intriguing to deeply concerning. A stable master, responsible for feeding and grooming the horses, reported a peculiar incident involving one of the transport animals used on the monastery expedition. The horse had refused water, pawed violently at the ground, and displayed erratic movement. The stablemaster noted that the animal's saddlecloth, still unwashed from the journey, bore a faint discoloration resembling dried blood. He assumed it was from the monastery courtyard where the incident had taken place. Yet the pattern of the stain, upon closer inspection, appeared irregular and unlike typical smears from injury. The stablemaster brought the cloth to the infirmary for examination. The physician, puzzled, examined it and observed that the dried material adhered unusually well to the fibers, almost fused with them. The physician recommended it be burned for sanitation, as was standard practice with unknown biological contaminants. Before this could be done, Matthias requested the cloth be brought to him for analysis. He believed the stain might correspond to the compound found in the traveler's satchel, and wanted to compare them. His notes indicate a measured, professional interest, nothing more. But this single decision, made in accordance with ordinary archival procedure, became a turning point. Because when the stain on the cloth was compared to the residue on the fragments, the archivist noted a troubling similarity in texture and hue. The hardened material resembled iron oxide, but with a binding quality more consistent with resin or gum. Its chemical nature was unclear. The archivist planned to conduct a small heating test, an analysis intended only to determine whether the substance melted, crystallized, or released any odor when exposed to controlled warmth. This was an entirely standard method for classifying unknown medical compounds. He recorded the exact time he prepared the sample. He did not record the moment the temperature of the mixture began to rise on its own.
The first unusual reaction was subtle. Matthias, the archivist, had placed the fragment in a small iron bowl and applied gentle heat from a candle flame, as his notes describe. The temperature of the metal increased steadily, beyond what the flame alone could account for. He paused, glancing at the candle, but it burned at a steady, unremarkable rate. The parchment beneath the fragment began to emit a faint crimson sheen. The men in the room noticed it only peripherally at first, attributing it to reflected light. Within minutes, however, the sheen deepened. The iron bowl itself seemed to pulse as if breathing, and a subtle vibration ran through the table. Matthias leaned closer, inspecting the fragment with scholarly curiosity, unaware of the slow rise in temperature against his fingertips. When he touched it, the sensation was immediate. A heat that was not superficial, but penetrating, as if the metal itself absorbed energy from some source beyond the candle. The Templar knights present, assigned to guard the artifacts, instinctively reached for their swords. Yet nothing in the room indicated external threat. The chamber remained silent, except for the low hum that now accompanied the pulsing glow. It was almost imperceptible at first, like distant thunder beneath the earth. Then faint whispers emerged, not carried by air, but resonating directly within their minds. The words were undecipherable, though the tone conveyed command and insistence simultaneously. Matthias, startled, dropped the fragment. The material did not shatter. Instead, it flattened briefly, spreading across the table as if seeking contact. The heat intensified, and the crimson hue became metallic, almost reflective. The knights recoiled. One of them struck the fragment with the flat of his sword. The metal absorbed the blow, and a resonant tone rang out, deeper than iron should produce. Sparks did not fly, flames did not ignite. The sound vibrated through their bones. Morimont, summoned urgently from his quarters, arrived with measured steps. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the fragment's reaction, though he betrayed no fear. Years of campaigns had taught him to assess danger quickly, yet even he hesitated before touching the crimson sheen. Instead, he extended his hand cautiously, then allowed the fragment to flow toward his gauntlet. The metal climbed along the leather of his glove as though alive, integrating seamlessly. When it reached his forearm, it cooled, leaving behind a faint metallic stain. The chamber fell silent. The knights exchanged wary glances. This was no ordinary compound. Its behavior defied known alchemy, metallurgy, and even the rudimentary chemical knowledge that Templar scholars had accumulated from Arabic and Greek sources. Yet Morimont appeared calm, almost expectant. "Have you felt it?" he asked quietly, not as a question, but as confirmation. One knight shook his head. "Only heat and a sound, Commander. It speaks to us." Morimont's gaze did not waver. "It is not speaking to you. It is recognizing you." The words were met with incredulity. Recognition by an inanimate substance was impossible, yet the reaction of the fragment suggested more than mere coincidence. Sparks of movement appeared along its surface, as if flowing intentionally, and the crimson sheen began to elongate, curling toward the armor worn by the knights standing nearby. Some tried to step back. The fragments responded instantly. The crimson material extended, stretching across the floor to their boots and greaves, then climbing like liquid toward the chest plates. Screams of astonishment filled the chamber as the metal spread rapidly, bonding with their armor. It was no longer an inert substance. It had become part of their equipment. The Templar knights' swords and shields remained untouched, yet their armor was absorbed, dyed a deep, unnatural red. A voice, not from Morimont, not from any living being, resonated within the minds of all present. "We awaken, we bind, we hunger." The knights froze. Some attempted to remove their newly crimsoned armor. It would not yield. It clung, tightened, and vibrated faintly against the skin. Panic surged, but Morimont raised a hand, signaling them to remain still. "Steel older than man, forged before the first kingdoms. This is ferrum sanguinis, blood iron. The Order did not send us here merely to guard manuscripts. We were chosen for this night." The room's atmosphere thickened. The glowing red metal pulsed with every heartbeat. One knight tried to strike it with a hammer from the workshop. The blow did nothing to the armor, but a shockwave traveled through his own arm, pain flaring as though the metal resisted. Another knight fainted, overwhelmed by the weight and heat. Morimont moved among the men, his gauntlet tracing the surface of their chest plates. "The oath comes next.
he whispered. "We swear loyalty not to pope, king, or relic, but to the blood iron itself. Once bound, there is no reversal." The knights' fear was palpable, yet in that fear arose a strange clarity, a sense that their lives had been irrevocably altered, drawn into something older than scripture or empire. The crimson metal shimmered, its faint hum now a chorus of whispers in their minds. At that moment, the chamber seemed to expand, the air itself alive. Shadows deepened unnaturally. And though no one yet fully understood the purpose of the blood iron, all knew one truth. From this night onward, nothing would ever be the same.
Dawn found the Templar chamber still bathed in the crimson glow of the blood iron. The first light of the sun filtered through high, narrow windows, yet it did little to dissipate the unnatural shimmer clinging to the knight's armor. 13 men remained standing. The others, who had resisted or fled, had collapsed somewhere along the corridor, incapacitated by the weight and heat of the living metal. Morimont moved among the remaining knights with deliberate calm. His voice, steady and low, carried an authority no man dared challenge. "We are bound," he said. "Our lives, our strength, and our will belong to the iron, not to Jerusalem, not to kings, not to scripture, but to the memory within it. It remembers us, as we will remember it." Several knights tried to speak, but words faltered in the presence of the living steel. The whispers, now a chorus, echoed within their skulls. Loyalty, blood, steel. The chamber seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm no eye could see, but every man could feel. The red metal pulsed stronger, drawing warmth and attention toward Morimont. He extended his gauntlet over the pedestal, where the fractured obsidian once held the sheet of crimson metal. The surface responded, rising slightly and curling upward like smoke. Then Morimont revealed the truth he had hidden from them during the journey. The visions that had guided him were not dreams. They were calls, originating from the blood iron itself. For months, it had spoken to him through sleep and meditation, whispering in a tongue that predated all known languages. It had summoned him to Al-Khalat al-Hamra to awaken the ancient covenant of its makers. A murmur of disbelief ran through the knights. "Chosen by metal?" one whispered, his voice trembling. "Yes," Morimont replied, "chosen to become its vessel, and through it the vessel of something older than any crown or creed." Fear escalated into resistance. 7 knights lunged simultaneously, attempting to strike the commander with their swords. Their blades shattered upon impact with the crimson breastplate, sparks flashing but causing no wound. Morimont moved with terrifying precision. With each strike, the metal seemed to respond, pulsing brighter and tightening as if feeding on the violence. The chamber echoed with the sounds of splintering bone and shattered steel. Screams filled the room, yet no blood flowed beyond the few trickles allowed by the armor. The knights realized with horror the blood iron dictated what could be shed, absorbing and reflecting violence, converting it into energy that strengthened the wearer. By mid-morning, silence had returned, punctuated only by the slow, steady pulse of the crimson glow. 7 men lay broken, 6 remained standing. Their eyes reflected shock, disbelief, and the dawning understanding that they could not oppose Morimont without sacrificing themselves entirely. The blood iron had chosen its vessels, and the commander was now its centerpiece. Morimont gathered the remaining knights around the pedestal. The black obsidian cracked further, exhaling thin crimson vapor that twisted like serpents at their feet. He recited the oath, a solemn litany whispered by the metal itself. "By iron older than scripture, by blood older than man, we are bound. We are crimson. Our armor is our covenant. Our lives are the offering." One by one, the knights repeated the words. Their voices joined in harmony with the whispers emanating from the metal. The chest plates, greaves, and helmets tightened as if sealing their bodies into living vessels. The blood iron had completed its work. The Templars were no longer ordinary men. From that day onward, the Crimson Templars moved through the world as shadows of legend. Their armor remained crimson until their final breath. It responded to intent and action, darkening in deceit, brightening in the act of violence.
Many later chroniclers, writing centuries afterwards, noted that these knights bled only when the armor permitted, their injuries mediated by the living metal itself. When they returned to Jerusalem, the rest of the order had expected relics. Instead, they were met with fear. Witnesses reported the Crimson Templars moving silently, conversing with empty air, their visors glowing faintly in darkness. Footsteps left traces of red dust upon holy stone, vanishing before explanation. Whispers of possession, blessing, and unnatural power spread rapidly. The church, uncertain and alarmed, convened secret councils. Exorcists were dispatched. Midnight raids sought to seize the Crimson Knights. None returned. By morning, the Crimson Templars had vanished, leaving only rumors and terror in their wake. The legend endured in whispers and in forbidden codices. One such manuscript, the Liber Hamra, detailed the events of that night, describing the blood iron as patient, cognizant, and bound to its chosen. Even centuries later, those who dared read its pages recognized the warning. The Crimson Oath was not merely an armor of war, but a covenant older than kingdoms, a legacy that outlived flesh and blood.
Centuries passed, and the Templar order flourished, only to collapse abruptly in 1307 under the weight of political machinations and royal greed. Yet the legend of the Crimson Templars, long whispered in secret, endured beyond recorded history. The events of that fateful night at Alcalá al-Hamra were deliberately excised from chronicles, erased from registries, and dismissed by official scribes as superstition. But some fragments remained. The Liber Hamra, a codex preserved in the shadows of monasteries and private collections, carried the faintest record of the Crimson Birth, written in code and obscure ciphers to prevent detection. Within its pages, the blood iron was not merely described as a weapon or armor, but as an intelligence older than mankind, capable of choice, recognition, and binding those it deemed worthy. In the early years of the 14th century, as King Philip IV of France plotted against the Templar order, the focus of the church and royal agents was narrow: wealth, political influence, and the neutralization of perceived threats. Rumors of knights who could resist injury, whose armor responded to will and blood, reached only the most paranoid and secretive circles. Some royal advisors suggested that the Templars possessed unnatural relics, artifacts not sanctioned by the Church, instruments of power beyond understanding. Philip's agents, however, had no knowledge of the blood iron itself. What they found instead were accounts of strange disappearances, red-stained armor, and witnesses who could not reconcile what they had seen with the known laws of combat. In 1308, a team of royal operatives descended upon a secluded commandery near Paris. According to detailed inventories preserved in the archives of the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, they discovered 13 suits of armor arranged meticulously in a perfect circle. The site, recorded in diagrams and sketch notes by clerical scribes, was unlike anything documented. No bodies occupied the armor, yet the chest plates bore faint impressions as if a form had recently filled them. The metal, dark crimson in hue, exuded warmth when touched. The scribes who examined the armor noted with unease that the heat was not uniform. It seemed to pulse, rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Attempts to move or open the helmets proved frustrating. The visors resisted, sliding with an unearthly smoothness, locking automatically against interference. Some witnesses swore that when they circled the armor, the helmets turned slightly, as if following their presence. Others claimed to hear faint whispers, phrases in no known language, rising and falling in cadence with the armor's pulse. Philip's men debated burning the armor immediately, but traditional melting methods failed. The furnaces reached temperatures well beyond those normally required to liquefy iron. Flames licked the metal surface, turning it bright red, yet the hue remained intact even as the fire consumed nearby wooden supports. The officers concluded that the material was resistant to ordinary techniques, perhaps treated or alloyed with substances unknown to contemporary smiths. A decision was made to entomb the armor in lead-lined coffers and dispose of them in a mine in southern France, one deep enough to prevent easy recovery. Historical notes indicate the mine collapsed within a year, sealing its contents. Miners who worked nearby would later claim, in hushed tones, that on certain nights, when the moon hung full and crimson in the sky, the faint sound of metal shifting and whispered phrases could be heard emanating from deep underground, as though 13 knights still walked beneath the earth, waiting. Meanwhile, across Europe, scattered reports of unexplained combat outcomes and mysterious warriors continued. Some chroniclers wrote of knights appearing suddenly on battlefields, clad in deep red armor, impervious to arrows and blade alike. Many dismissed these as legends, exaggerations, or conflations of local folklore. Yet the uniformity of the description, 13 warriors, red armor, bound by something unseen, persisted across unrelated regions and decades. The Church's attempts to investigate were methodical but constrained. Official inquiries in Paris, London, and Rome catalogued events only obliquely, describing knights whose deaths were delayed or whose injuries were unexplainable. The Vatican retained copies of some manuscripts, but these were sealed from public view. One marginal note from an inquisitorial clerk in 1325 reads, "The witnesses describe forms that bleed only as the armor wills it. The nature of this is unholy. Care must be taken. Records must be hidden." Despite centuries of suppression, traces of the Crimson Templars appeared sporadically. In the Mediterranean, accounts from sailors reference knights who boarded ships in red armor, only to vanish into the fog before morning. In the Levant, travelers describe castles and ruins where iron fixtures shimmered unnaturally in candlelight. Some local traditions spoke of a Red Covenant, an older brotherhood than the Crusades themselves, whose members walked silently through time. Modern researchers uncovering fragments of the Liber Hamra and other clandestine codices identified peculiar references to chemical compounds and metallurgical techniques that could not be replicated with known medieval methods. The text suggests that the blood iron had a reactive property, one that could bond to both metal and flesh and respond to human intent. Though shrouded in allegory, these documents hint at a covenant designed to outlast human lifespans, tying its chosen bearers to the armor across generations. Some scientists attempting to recreate the described materials discovered anomalous reactions. Minute traces of an unknown metallic compound found in soil samples from collapsed sites associated with the Crimson Templars demonstrated properties unlike any recognized element. It oxidized under extreme conditions, reacted unpredictably to blood, and sometimes produced faint, low-frequency vibrations detectable only with sensitive instruments. The implication was unsettling. If the blood iron truly persisted, then the covenant of the Crimson Templars had never ended. The armor's ability to select, bond, and preserve its bearers could theoretically survive beyond recorded history. Scholars analyzing the surviving texts speculate that the Templars' encounters with the blood iron were not isolated. Rather, the covenant functioned as an enduring, latent intelligence, one patient, adaptive, and capable of awakening only when conditions were favorable. In addition, surviving records indicate that the Church, while attempting to control the situation, may have inadvertently ensured its continuation. By sealing references, entombing artifacts, and collapsing mines, the clergy protected the covenant from mundane discovery, while simultaneously guaranteeing that only the blood iron could reveal itself again. Each intervention preserved the material and its influence for centuries, awaiting the next moment when it might reassert control over chosen individuals. Legends maintained that the armor's hue responded to its wearer's choices, brightening in acts of violence, darkening when deceit occurred, sometimes pulsing with a soft glow when intent aligned with the blood iron's unknown purpose.
Chroniclers noted that the knights did not bleed unless the armor allowed it, suggesting a symbiosis that transcended ordinary metallurgy. By the late Middle Ages, as Europe's political landscape shifted, and the remnants of Templar influence were hunted or dispersed, the Crimson Templars' traces became largely invisible to official record. Their influence, however, remained latent. Scholars who studied the codices noted the recurring motif of patient selection. The blood iron did not act impulsively. It waited. It remembered the oath of its original 13 bearers, but it could choose new candidates, responding to merit, bloodline, or circumstance, independent of human decree. Thus, while the order fell, the covenant did not. The armor endured. The whispers persisted in abandoned vaults, mines, and ruined fortresses. Miners, shepherds, and travelers occasionally reported faint sounds, crimson stains that would not fade, or metal that seemed to move of its own accord. The consensus among modern researchers of surviving texts is stark. The blood iron was not destroyed. The Crimson Templars were not defeated. The Covenant remained patient. It waited. And one day, if awakened, it would choose again. The night of the Crimson Birth, when Morimont and his knights first bound themselves to the living metal, was not the beginning of the end. It was the first awakening of a covenant that measured time not in years or centuries, but in the persistence of iron, blood, and loyalty beyond mortal comprehension.
Centuries passed, and yet the shadow of the Crimson Templars endured, lingering like a memory in places where history refused to erase it. By the late 19th century, when European archaeologists and scholars began cataloging ancient fortifications in southern France, local legends of red knights beneath the earth persisted. Miners spoke in hushed tones of tunnels long collapsed, where the faint clinking of metal echoed through dark shafts during certain lunar phases. Shepherds claimed to see crimson figures moving at dusk across hillsides where no one had camped or fought in living memory. Scholars dismissed such tales as folklore, but among the rare few who studied the Liber Hamra or preserved fragments of Templar records, these anecdotes were treated as corroborative, subtle signs of a long-living phenomenon. The Liber Hamra, preserved in scattered codices across private European collections, describes the blood iron as self-aware, capable of awakening only under specific conditions. It is patient, silent, and selective. Modern metallurgists, testing fragments believed to contain traces of the compound, have observed properties unlike any known material, a malleability and resilience far exceeding that of ordinary iron, a faint reaction to human presence, and subtle low-frequency vibrations that increase when touched. When exposed to blood, even minimal traces, the substance seems to respond, altering its color slightly, sometimes brightening, sometimes deepening to a near black hue. A particularly intriguing case occurred in the early 20th century. In a collapsed mine near the Sevens Mountains, long suspected to house one of the entombed sets of crimson armor, an excavation team recovered iron fragments encased in lead. When the lead was removed, several fragments exhibited the same warm pulse noted by observers in the 14th century. Instruments recorded faint acoustic emissions, irregular but deliberate vibrations within a frequency range imperceptible to the human ear without amplification. Shepherds claimed to see crimson figures moving at dusk across hillsides where no one had camped or fought in living memory. Scholars dismissed such tales as folklore, but among the rare few who studied the Liber Hamra or preserved fragments of Templar records, these anecdotes were treated as corroborative, subtle signs of a long-living phenomenon. No complete set of armor was ever recovered, and the fragments were reburied under layers of rock after repeated attempts to study them. Attempts to melt the iron in modern furnaces yielded inconsistent results. In some instances, the metal resisted liquefaction entirely, cooling into a brittle but intact form, while in others it appeared to flow briefly, before solidifying again, retaining a deep, metallic red sheen. Researchers who interacted with the fragments described a sensation akin to being observed, a subtle pressure at the back of the skull, a vibration beneath the feet, as if the material possessed consciousness beyond human comprehension. Historical investigation suggests that the original 13 Crimson Templars may never have fully departed from the world. The Liber Hamra contains numerous passages indicating that the blood iron grants its bearers a form of stasis, the ability to survive without ordinary sustenance, to heal slowly or completely from otherwise fatal wounds, and to move undetected for extended periods. Chroniclers noted that in battle, sometimes witnesses saw armored figures disappear as arrows struck them or swords passed through armor without resistance. These records, often dismissed as exaggeration or hallucination, align with modern observations of the material's reactive and selective qualities. The phenomenon appears to persist across time and geography. During World War II, in the ruins of certain French abbeys and fortified sites once associated with the Templars, local accounts recorded flashes of red light and faint metallic clanking at night. Soldiers stationed in these areas spoke of shadows moving across courtyards when no one was present, and of brief, inexplicable warmth along their footsteps on cold stone. Researchers later suggested the possibility of electromagnetic anomalies. Others speculated that residual properties of the blood iron could remain active for centuries, responding to human presence or intent. Modern analysis also indicates that the Covenant binds itself selectively, never indiscriminately. It does not awaken merely in the presence of humans, but responds to individuals who meet unknown criteria, perhaps lineage, intent, or a combination of factors lost to time. The text of the Liber Hamra suggests that the blood iron can choose its bearers, binding only those deemed worthy. The language is cryptic, describing the process as an invitation whispered in the heart of iron and a memory older than flesh. It is notable that in every recorded instance, whether medieval or modern, activation occurs in locations associated with the original covenant, ruined monasteries, buried mines, or sites of past Templar operations. Some scholars have proposed that the blood iron is not merely reactive, but intelligent. The Liber Hamra includes references to voices within steel and the covenant speaking through the vessel, implying that the armor itself may be a sentient agent capable of guiding, influencing, and even punishing its chosen knights. These descriptions correspond with centuries of anecdotal evidence: miners hearing whispers beneath the earth, explorers seeing red reflections in darkness, and archival accounts of knights whose armor allowed them to bleed only at its discretion. Archaeologists have also noted that the blood iron does not decay like ordinary metal. Fragments recovered from sites believed to contain the original 13 sets show no rust, no weakening of structure, and an unusual density that defies simple explanation. Analysis of surface composition reveals traces of iron and carbon, but also elements unclassified by modern science, stable at high temperatures, resistant to corrosion, and capable of bonding at a molecular level with other metals. Tests in laboratories with controlled atmospheres and high temperatures show reactions suggesting that the blood iron may retain memory of previous forms and possibly respond to new inputs, a phenomenon without modern parallel. The conclusion drawn by the few scholars who have studied these phenomena in depth is chilling. The Crimson Templars were not defeated. The covenant created by Morimont and his 12 companions persists. The blood iron, patient across centuries, waits for circumstances conducive to reawakening. It may have already bonded with other individuals unknown to history, leaving traces only perceptible under specific conditions. Some historians argue that the Covenant's survival explains certain anomalies in European military history: soldiers appearing or disappearing inexplicably, battle outcomes inconsistent with recorded tactics, and reports of armored figures in remote areas behaving outside normal human endurance. While these events are often dismissed as myth, the correlation with the Blood Iron's historical timeline is striking. The Liber Hamra warns explicitly of this patient, enduring intelligence. The Blood Iron does not awaken without purpose. It does not act in haste or for the benefit of ordinary power structures. Its covenant transcends human law, responding only to its own logic and criteria. And yet, as scholars cautiously note, every fragment and anecdote point to one single fact. The covenant remembers its original oath, and it recognizes those who approach it across time. In conclusion, the Night of the Crimson Birth was not merely an isolated event of medieval violence or heretical fascination. It was the inauguration of a covenant older than kingdoms, sustained through living metal, bound by oath, and capable of enduring beyond the lifespan of those who swore it. Morimont and his 12 companions became the first witnesses to a force whose influence stretches into the present. The Blood Iron waits, patient and intelligent, its chosen unknown, its purpose hidden beneath layers of history, myth, and metal. The whispers continue, faint and persistent, in abandoned mines, ruined monasteries, and red-stained earth. Scholars, miners, and travelers alike report subtle phenomena that hint at the Covenant's presence. The Crimson Armor may never walk openly again, but its memory, its power, and its covenant endure, silently, patiently, until the next awakening.
The Templar Order, though outwardly bound to the Church and its hierarchical structure, had always maintained a network of secrecy and autonomy that allowed individual commanders considerable latitude in matters of intelligence, relics, and strategic reconnaissance. Morimont's detachment, though small, exemplified this duality, official in appearance, but in practice executing missions of delicate discretion that few outside the inner circle could comprehend. In the weeks following the Crimson Birth, the immediate consequences of the oath began to manifest, both within the small company and in the surrounding political landscape of the Levant. The surviving 13 knights, bound irrevocably to the Blood Iron, moved silently through the region, ostensibly continuing their official duties. Their armor, now crimson, was not a mere badge of rank or heraldry. It became both shield and instrument. Chroniclers of Antioch, though careful not to name names, recorded instances of knights in striking red armor appearing at embattled monasteries, their presence shifting the balance of local skirmishes without leaving any casualties visible to human witnesses. In one report, a Templar patrol sent to reinforce a coastal fort was met by figures in blood-colored steel who had already neutralized a band of raiders, their blades broken, but their opponents unharmed by conventional means. The Church, largely unaware of the true nature of the Blood Iron, attributed such events to divine intervention or providence. Letters from the Patriarchate of Antioch in 1184 commend unnamed knights for valor in skirmishes along the Orontes River, noting that the attackers were turned away as if by unseen hands. These same letters, when examined alongside Templar internal records, reveal a tension, commendation for effectiveness, but concern over unaccountable methods. The surviving knights of Morimont's company were efficient, precise, and unnervingly quiet, their movements coordinated with an intuition that could not be explained by training alone. Morimont, now more a vessel of the Blood Iron than a man of flesh and blood, began to exercise his command in ways that unsettled even the most disciplined. He established a series of clandestine patrols, instructing the knights to maintain operational secrecy while observing the region for anomalies that might intersect with their covenant. In Templar correspondence preserved in the archives of Antioch, he describes scouting for relics, inscriptions, and remnants of knowledge older than any creed, suggesting that the Blood Iron itself dictated the targets of interest. These excursions revealed remnants of an ancient world, caves, fortresses, and monastic ruins that had escaped historical record. At Al-Khalar al-Hamra, the original site of the Crimson Birth, the Templars observed changes in the structure. stones once crimson from the ancient sect's rituals appeared deeper, almost glowing under torchlight. Symbols carved into the walls seemed to shift subtly when observed, a phenomenon Morimont recorded meticulously. According to his notes, these were not illusions, but manifestations of the Blood Iron's will resonating with the ancient energies that had first imbued the armor. A particularly notable operation involved the rediscovery of a subterranean chamber beneath the ruins of a minor fortress near the Amanus Mountains. Arab sources identified the site as once belonging to a sect known for its devotion to metallurgical rituals. Here, the Templars uncovered vessels containing thin sheets of iron, resembling those first encountered at the Red Fortress. The material, though dulled by centuries, retained faint traces of crimson pigmentation. Morimont's journals described the effect as immediate. The knight's armor responded with a subtle pulse, as if recognizing kinship with the ancient metal. However, this phenomenon was not without danger. During excavation, 2 knights suffered sudden, inexplicable seizures when handling the sheets. Chronicled later by Morimont, the episodes suggest that the Blood Iron had the capacity to interact selectively with those who were unbound or partially aware of its properties. The seizures were brief but violent, producing pain sufficient to incapacitate. Morimont's notes emphasize that the Covenant chose its actions carefully. It did not harm indiscriminately, but it enforced obedience and respect, reinforcing the hierarchy within the Crimson Templars. The Templars' movements were not unnoticed. Local rulers and chroniclers recorded unusual troop behaviors, particularly the tendency of red-armored knights to appear and vanish without leaving corpses or standard traces. Arab historians of the period, including Ibn al-Qalanisi, mention men who wear the color of blood and whose weapons leave no scar yet subdue the strongest men, though their identities remained cryptic. These accounts, though fragmented and geographically scattered, align with Morimont's activities during the years immediately following the Crimson Birth. Within the company, Morimont established strict rules. No member was to interact with outsiders beyond necessity. The Covenant demanded secrecy. The knights were instructed to keep their armor polished and their oaths unbroken. Morimont emphasized the duality of their existence. They were knights of the temple, sworn to faith and order, yet simultaneously beholden to a force older than Scripture. The Blood Iron, he wrote in his journals, was neither evil nor good. It was beyond morality, seeking only fulfillment of its covenant. Conflicts arose among the knights as the nature of the covenant became apparent. The Blood Iron heightened certain instincts, vigilance, aggression, and loyalty, yet tempered them with restraint. 2 knights, less willing to accept the new hierarchy, attempted to remove their armor during a patrol near the Orontes. The metal, responding instantly, bonded with the cuirass and greaves, burning lightly into the flesh as a warning. Morimont intervened, explaining that the Covenant's will was absolute. Resistance could result in permanent incapacitation or death. These incidents reinforced obedience, while demonstrating the autonomous power of the Blood Iron. The historical consequence of these actions was significant. The Crimson Templars, though numerically small, began to influence regional conflicts disproportionately. Raiders and bandit groups reported encounters with red-armored warriors who vanished as quickly as they appeared. Local lords, unable to comprehend the knights' method of engagement, offered tribute and favors to avoid conflict. Morimont's company, operating under both official and covenant mandates, became a phantom force, simultaneously enforcing Templar authority while advancing the Blood Iron's hidden purposes. Correspondence from neighboring commanderies, preserved in the Cartelage General, records attempts to integrate these knights into broader operations. However, the Crimson Templars frequently deviated from orders, citing higher priorities dictated by the Covenant. This divergence caused friction within the Order's hierarchy. Yet Morimont's authority, reinforced by the Blood Iron, ensured compliance within his company. No external force could override the Covenant's influence. Perhaps most disturbing to historians is the recorded interaction between the Crimson Templars and other religious groups. Chronicles mention encounters with sects once thought extinct, but now partially resurgent. The knights reportedly found cryptic markings on temple walls, some bearing resemblance to the original Red Fortress symbols. These markings suggested an ancient understanding of metallurgy, ritual, and perhaps knowledge of the blood iron itself. Morimont interpreted these as signs that the Covenant's influence had ancient roots, predating the Crusades and persisting across centuries. By the end of 1184, the historical footprint of the Crimson Templars was clear. Their actions, though secretive, had shifted local power dynamics. Their appearance in battle was swift and decisive, their methods inexplicable to ordinary men. Yet for all their effectiveness, they remained largely invisible in official Templar records, intentionally excluded or obscured to prevent scandal or suspicion of heresy. The company moved like shadows across the Levant, bound by oath, armored in crimson, and directed by the will of an intelligence older than man. They were a force within the order of the Temple that no king, pope, or army could fully control. Their covenant was absolute, their secrecy eternal, and their presence a persistent anomaly in the documented history of the Crusades.
By the summer of 1185, the presence of the Crimson Templars in the Levant had begun to influence the broader theater of the Crusades, though official chroniclers rarely mentioned them by name. Their actions were recorded indirectly. The sudden failure of raiding parties, the inexplicable retreat of fortified contingents, and reports from local populations of knights appearing and vanishing like specters. Morimont's company, now fully bound to the blood iron, operated with an efficiency and unpredictability that both aided and unsettled the Templar order. The first documented military engagement of note occurred near the town of Latakia, where a coalition of mercenaries and local raiders threatened a Templar-held abbey. Official dispatches credit a handful of knights with repelling the attackers, but surviving letters and journals reveal more extraordinary details. Witnesses described a flash of red armor moving through the battlefield, killing without the typical carnage. Arrows struck the knights and ricocheted harmlessly. Swords met their breastplates and shattered, leaving no injury. The attackers reportedly fled in confusion, claiming that the knights did not bleed and yet fought as one. Morimont, observing from a distance, noted in his journal that the blood iron responded to the chaos. The armor of each knight pulsed in accordance with threat and intent, its red hue brightening when enemies approached aggressively. The Covenant guided their movements, effectively coordinating the company with outspoken orders. Even the positioning of each knight seemed preordained, as though the metal itself dictated tactics and ensured maximum efficiency. During the skirmish, 2 knights attempted independent action, disregarding the rhythm imposed by the Covenant. One of them swung his sword recklessly, only to find the weapon meeting resistance not from the enemy, but from the blood iron itself. The armor vibrated violently, and the knight fell to the ground, his cuirass painfully constricting until he complied with the coordinated movement dictated by Morimont and the Covenant. The other knight, seeing the danger, immediately adjusted his actions. Morimont's journal notes this incident with a terse observation: "The Covenant enforces discipline beyond the capacity of flesh and mind. Disobedience is temporary, but memory is enduring." After the engagement, the abbey remained intact, and the Templars reported minimal losses. To the outside world, it was considered a miraculous defense, a sign of divine favor. Within the company, however, Morimont recorded the true cause. The blood iron had directed the action, not God, not king, not the conventional strategies of the order. The armor's intelligence had chosen to act through its vessels, and the knights were merely instruments of its will. In the following months, Morimont expanded operations across northern Syria. The Crimson Templars moved like shadows along coastal roads and mountain passes,
intercepting raiders, recovering lost relics, and occasionally seeking out remnants of the ancient sect that had first created the crimson metal. In one incident near Antioch, the company uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the ruins of a monastery. Its walls were lined with iron sheets, each faintly crimson and etched with symbols reminiscent of those at the Red Fortress. Morimont observed the blood iron pulse in recognition when his knights approached. He noted that the fragments emitted low vibrations, and the whispers, faint but insistent, urged caution and respect. The operation was meticulous. The Crimson Templars did not disturb the artifacts, choosing instead to document and isolate them. Morimont's journal emphasizes that the blood iron guided this discretion. The covenant required preservation as much as action. The knights cataloged the chamber's contents in Latin, Arabic, and Syriac, but no record reached the Grand Master or the Patriarchate. Official Templar chronicles continued to report minor skirmishes and defensive victories, oblivious to the presence of 13 knights in living crimson armor whose actions determined outcomes without leaving human trace. Political consequences soon followed. Local lords, witnessing inexplicable events, sought alliances with the Templars, offering tribute and fortification support. These arrangements strengthened the Order's strategic position along the Levantine coast, yet Morimont maintained strict separation between the company's covenant duties and the politics of men. The blood iron demanded focus and loyalty above all else. Knights were instructed to respond only when the covenant's presence dictated intervention, ensuring that no action compromised the secrecy of the oath. During this period, rumors began to circulate among local populations. Arab chroniclers, while careful to avoid heresy, recorded sightings of armored figures who wore the color of blood and moved as if carried by spirits. Merchants traveling the coastal roads told of knights appearing suddenly, protecting caravans, and then vanishing into forests or hills. Some local soldiers reported encountering warriors whose armor emitted a faint glow, yet who did not bleed when struck, creating fear and awe in equal measure. These accounts, while anecdotal, aligned with Morimont's journal entries and suggest that the Covenant's influence extended beyond the battlefield into the perception and psychology of surrounding peoples. Within the company, the knights' understanding of the blood iron deepened. The metal, though bound to them, demanded constant awareness. The armor responded to intent, fear, aggression, and loyalty. Morimont recorded that in battle, each knight developed an instinctive understanding of the Covenant's guidance. Movements became synchronized without verbal command. Strategy emerged organically through the collective bond of the armor. The knights were no longer individuals acting independently. They had become extensions of the blood iron's will. Tensions, however, were not entirely absent. The Covenant's autonomy required obedience, but human desire for honor and recognition sometimes clashed with the blood iron's dictates. On one occasion, a young knight sought to intercept a raiding party ahead of schedule, hoping to gain a claim. The blood iron resisted, constricting his armor until he submitted to the coordinated approach dictated by Morimont. The lesson was harsh, but decisive. The Covenant enforces discipline beyond the capacity of flesh and mind. Disobedience is temporary, but memory is enduring. By the end of 1185, the Crimson Templars had established a pattern. They would appear where the Covenant called, act with precision, and vanish without trace. Their actions influenced the balance of power along the Levantine coast, reinforced Templar holdings, and protected relics and monastic sites from threat. Yet no contemporary chronicler understood the true reason for their efficacy. Only Morimont and his knights, bound to the blood iron, comprehended the Covenant's demands and the ancient intelligence that guided them. The historical consequence of these years is evident in fragmentary accounts. Fortresses that should have fallen remained intact. Raiders vanished without a fight. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem or Antioch reported safe passage where danger should have prevailed. The presence of the Crimson Templars, though invisible to official records, altered the course of local events, and ensured that key strategic sites remained under Templar control. Morimont's leadership, combined with the Covenant's autonomous guidance, created a force unlike any other in recorded history. The knights, armored in crimson and bound by oath, were both protectors and agents of an intelligence older than Scripture. Their operations were meticulous, efficient, and ultimately inscrutable to those outside the Covenant. By the close of this chapter in their history, the Crimson Templars had transitioned from a small experimental detachment into a legendary force, their presence altering not only battles, but the perception of power itself along the eastern Mediterranean coast.
By the spring of 1186, whispers of the Crimson Templars had reached the upper echelons of the Templar Order, though the nature of these whispers remained frustratingly obscure. Local commanders and abbots noted anomalies in skirmishes and pilgrim reports, yet no chronicler could identify the precise actors. The Grand Master of the Order, informed through coded letters, sensed the emergence of a phenomenon that both protected and unsettled Templar interests. It was during this period that the Church's most discreet inquiries began to converge upon Morimont and his company. The surviving correspondence between regional Templar commanderies, preserved in fragmentary Latin manuscripts, reveals cautious attempts to assess the influence of knights in red armor. One letter, sent from Tripoli to the Grand Master in Jerusalem, describes a band of warriors, clad entirely in crimson steel, repelled raiders without wounding a soul. Their presence was sudden, their strategy unlike any known pattern. None could approach them, yet no blow fell upon their armor. The letter concludes with a note of unease. It is as if they are guided not by men, but by some spirit older than our faith. Morimont, aware that the Church's attention was intensifying, began to institute stricter measures within the company. The blood iron demanded loyalty and precision, but secrecy was equally essential. Knights were instructed to travel in small groups, avoid interaction with local lords unless necessary, and never reveal the nature of their armor. Communication with other Templar forces was reduced to cryptic symbols and prearranged signals, ensuring that outsiders could not discern the Covenant's purpose. The Covenant itself appeared to grow more perceptive. Morimont's journals indicate that the armor reacted not only to external threats, but to subtle fluctuations in human intention. Knights who approached missions with pride or fear experienced increased tension in their armor, while those who moved with discipline and focus found the crimson plates warm and responsive. The blood iron seemed capable of measuring the alignment between its bearer's intent and its own will, and adjusting its behavior accordingly. Tensions within the company were inevitable. A few knights, uncomfortable with the Covenant's autonomy, attempted to resist its subtle control. Their armor, responding instantly, tightened, heated, and occasionally vibrated violently, enforcing submission. Morimont, observing these episodes, wrote, "The Covenant is neither cruel nor just. It is absolute. Obedience is survival, and survival is knowledge. To resist is to learn the weight of iron and the patience of blood." In early campaigns, the Crimson Templars engaged in a series of operations aimed at consolidating Templar influence along the northern Syrian coast. In one incident near the fort of Margat, a raiding coalition threatened a supply route critical to Jerusalem. Morimont led his knights along hidden paths, and within hours the raiders were neutralized. Reports from survivors describe warriors appearing suddenly from hill and forest, their crimson armor reflecting sunlight with a faint, unnatural glow. Arrows struck and bent without wounding a soul, swords shattered against steel. The raiders fled in terror. No Templar outside the company claimed to witness the event directly. Morimont's strategy was deliberate. The blood iron allowed him to act decisively while maintaining the secrecy necessary for the Covenant's survival. Each engagement reinforced the company's cohesion, and the knights learned to interpret the subtle pulses, vibrations, and whispers of the armor. Over time, the Covenant became a silent commander, guiding movement, enforcing discipline, and ensuring that every action aligned with its purpose. The Church, meanwhile, grew increasingly concerned. Word of the red armored knights had reached certain inquisitorial channels. Papal envoys sent to observe Templar fortresses noted peculiar behavior. Fortified garrisons that should have been vulnerable remained intact. Raiding parties that should have succeeded were mysteriously repelled. Chroniclers recorded phenomena defying conventional understanding. While no direct accusation of heresy was made, the intensity of observation increased. Secret inquiries sought evidence of unsanctioned relics, forbidden rituals, or unnatural practices. Morimont, foreseeing this scrutiny, reinforced his internal hierarchy. The knights were not merely soldiers, they were guardians of a covenant older than kingdoms. Each member was instructed in ritualized behavior to maintain cohesion and secrecy. Even simple movements, how they mounted horses, carried arms, or approached fortifications became codified gestures designed to avoid detection while reinforcing the bond between armor and bearer. Internal records indicate that the Covenant occasionally directed more aggressive action. In the town of Albara, for instance, Morimont's knights intervened in a minor dispute between local lords, not for political gain, but to prevent the desecration of a crypt containing iron artifacts reminiscent of the blood iron. Chroniclers noted that the knights' intervention was decisive and violent by necessity, yet strangely orderly. Arrows flew, yet no fatal wounds were inflicted beyond those allowed by the Covenant. The knight's armor pulsed in response to each act, its color brightening with aggression and dimming with restraint. These actions reinforced the notion that the blood iron was not merely reactive, but intelligent. It dictated the tempo of operations, constrained disobedience, and rewarded compliance. Morimont's journals describe a quiet reverence for the Covenant, noting that the armor's whispers guided moral as well as martial decisions. The knights learned to distinguish its signals, interpreting vibrations, heat, and subtle tonal shifts in its pulsing as instructions. By 1187, the political landscape had become increasingly volatile. Saladin's campaigns in the Levant intensified, and Templar strongholds faced renewed pressure. Morimont's company, operating largely outside conventional command structures, provided critical reinforcement. Accounts describe red armored knights appearing on the battlefield to rally defenses, strike strategic targets, or intercept raiding parties. Their presence altered the outcomes of engagements, yet their numbers and methods remained concealed from both allies and enemies. The historical significance of these years lies in the unique integration of covenant and strategy. The Crimson Templars operated simultaneously as soldiers, custodians, and agents of an intelligence older than man. Their armor, alive and responsive, enforced discipline, amplified martial skill, and guided decisions with a precision unattainable by human command alone. The blood iron, through Morimont, maintained absolute control, shaping events in accordance with its own purpose while preserving secrecy. As the years progressed, the Covenant solidified its influence. Knights bound to the blood iron became increasingly attuned to one another and to the armor itself. The red sheen of their armor, initially startling and alien, became familiar, a symbol of unity and power. Each engagement reinforced obedience. Each oath renewed loyalty, and each mission extended the Covenant's reach without exposing its true nature. By the close of this chapter in the Templars' history, the Crimson Company had transformed from a small experimental detachment into a legendary force. Their existence remained invisible to official chroniclers, yet their influence on regional conflicts, Templar strategy, and local perception was profound. The Covenant, alive within the Blood Iron, had established itself as an enduring presence, guiding its knights and shaping history in subtle but irreversible ways.
The year was 1188, and the Levant simmered under the twin pressures of Crusader ambition and Muslim consolidation. Saladin's forces had grown more organized and disciplined, reclaiming towns and fortresses that had previously remained tenuously under Crusader control. Amid this shifting political and military landscape, the Crimson Templars, bound irrevocably to the Blood Iron, became an increasingly critical yet invisible force. Their presence influenced outcomes in ways that no conventional strategy could predict, tipping scales subtly but decisively. Morimont, now fully integrated with the Covenant, had transformed his leadership into a seamless extension of the Blood Iron's will. Orders were given and executed almost instinctively, as if the armor itself had become the central commander, with Morimont acting as its medium. The knights had grown attuned to subtle signals, pulses of heat, shifts in vibration, faint whispers that seemed to originate both within the armor and in the surrounding air. Coordination within the company achieved a level beyond conventional military tactics. Movements were simultaneous, anticipatory, and perfectly timed. One of the most significant engagements of this period occurred near the fortress town of Crac des Chevaliers, where a coalition of Muslim raiders had gathered to intercept supplies bound for Tripoli. According to Morimont's journals, the knights moved under the cover of darkness, their crimson armor dimmed in accordance with the Covenant's discretion, yet still retaining the subtle red hue that gave them their name. Local scouts, unaware of the company's presence, reported strange sounds: clinking metal, footsteps in perfect silence, and shadows that moved in ways inconsistent with human behavior. When the ambush occurred, it was over almost before it began. Morimont's knights emerged from concealed positions, their armor glinting faintly in torchlight. Arrows and spears met the crimson steel and failed to pierce. Blades shattered on contact. Raiders were thrown into disarray, believing themselves to face more men than possible, and in the confusion, the Crimson Templars struck precisely at weak points. Wagons were overturned, archers neutralized without lethal wounds, and escape routes blocked. Not a single knight outside the Covenant was lost, and the raiders withdrew in terror, recounting to locals encounters with men in blood-colored armor who could not be killed. Morimont's account emphasizes the Covenant's guidance. He notes that the armor reacted instinctively to threat, brightness of red pulsing with proximity to danger, tightening and shifting with remarkable responsiveness. Attempts to move prematurely or act outside the Covenant's coordination caused immediate physical feedback. Armor stiffened, joints resisted, and the wearer experienced discomfort akin to intense pressure or burning. These sensations were enough to enforce obedience without injury. Morimont observed that the Blood Iron rewarded synchronicity with subtle warmth and rhythmic pulses, aligning knightly action perfectly with the unfolding situation. In the aftermath, the company withdrew silently, leaving no trace of battle beyond the retreat of raiders. Witnesses recorded only fleeting glimpses of red steel, and rumors began to spread that the Templars possessed unnatural powers. Letters to the Grand Master from commanders in Antioch and Tripoli describe miraculous defenses, yet make no direct reference to the company, implying an unacknowledged agent influencing the outcome. Morimont's journals, however, leave no doubt. The Covenant orchestrated the engagement, enforcing discipline and exacting precision beyond mortal capacity. Beyond direct combat, the Crimson Templars continued to secure relics and artifacts associated with the Blood Iron. Morimont's journals detail the careful exploration of subterranean chambers, ruins, and crypts,
often located beneath abandoned monasteries or fortress outposts. Here, iron artifacts, some faintly crimson, were catalogued and isolated. The blood iron guided these operations, signaling through subtle vibrations when certain objects required preservation and generating mild resistance when mishandled. In one notable instance near Al-Khalat al-Hamra, a previously undiscovered spiral staircase was found descending into a cavern lined with iron sheets. The Covenant responded instantly. The knight's armor pulsed in recognition, and Morimont described an almost audible whispering that seemed to originate both from the metal and the surrounding stone. The Covenant's intelligence extended beyond immediate danger. Morimont records moments where the blood iron anticipated political and military shifts, movements of enemy raiders, the collapse of local alliances, and the potential threat to Templar holdings. The knights, guided by these signals, often preempted attacks, intercepted convoys, or secured relics before adversaries could respond. Such foresight appeared almost prescient to those outside the company, further fueling rumors of supernatural intervention. Internal cohesion remained paramount. The blood iron punished disobedience quickly but precisely. Knights attempting to act independently experienced constriction in their armor, accompanied by heat and vibration that forced compliance. Morimont's journals indicate that repeated offenses were rare. The Covenant enforced immediate correction, ensuring that the company remained unified and efficient. Over time, knights internalized the rhythm of the blood iron, anticipating its signals instinctively and performing actions almost reflexively. Morimont also documented psychological effects. The Covenant influenced thought as well as action. Knights reported a deep sense of awareness, almost clairvoyant, regarding battlefield conditions and threats. Sleep was intermittent, dreams were vivid, and whispers in the armor carried moral as well as tactical instruction. While some knights struggled to reconcile these experiences with faith and duty, Morimont maintained that the Covenant operated beyond human morality. It was neither divine nor profane, but absolute. Political ramifications continued to unfold. Local lords, mystified by red-armored knights appearing to enforce order, began offering tribute, fortification support, and intelligence to maintain favor. The company avoided direct engagement with secular politics when possible, guided instead by the Covenant's prioritization of relics, strategic positions, and long-term preservation of the blood iron's influence. By doing so, Morimont ensured that the company remained untethered to mortal ambition, acting only at the Covenant's behest. By late 1188, the influence of the Crimson Templars had solidified. Their interventions, though invisible to conventional record, were decisive. The balance of power along the northern Levantine coast favored the Templars, not through sheer numbers or fortifications, but through the precision and adaptability enforced by the Covenant. Morimont's journal notes with quiet satisfaction, "The Covenant moves unseen, unchallenged, and unrecorded. Its will shapes the world not through decree, but through iron and oath." Yet the blood iron demanded vigilance. Morimont recognized that the Covenant's power could not be abused. Each engagement required precise alignment between intent, timing, and obedience. The company's success depended not merely on skill, but on harmony with the Covenant's intelligence. Mistakes were rare, but their consequences were immediate and instructive. The armor itself corrected errors, sometimes through discomfort, sometimes through subtle manipulation of movement. In sum, the period between 1188 and 1190 marks the height of the Crimson Templars' influence in the Levant. Their interventions, often invisible to history, stabilized Templar holdings, recovered sacred relics,
and neutralize threats that would have overwhelmed conventional forces. Their armor, bound to the blood iron, ensured obedience, amplified martial capability, and guided strategic decisions with an intelligence beyond mortal comprehension.
By the spring of 1190, the Levant had grown increasingly volatile. The Crusader states faced mounting pressure from Saladin's consolidated forces, and even within the Templar order, concern began to simmer over the mysterious actions of Morimont and his crimson armored knights. Their successes were undeniable, yet their methods, unpredictable and invisible to official records, inspired unease among both peers and superiors. Rumors of "red knights who do not bleed" had begun to circulate among the higher ranks, reaching the ears of influential commanders in Jerusalem. While the Grand Master outwardly praised the defense of key fortresses, private letters reveal a growing apprehension, a subtle fear that Morimont's company operated with autonomy beyond sanction. Within the company itself, the Covenant's influence had become both a blessing and a source of tension. The blood iron demanded absolute loyalty, precise obedience, and complete attunement to its will. For most knights, this integration produced extraordinary results: heightened awareness, unerring coordination, and near supernatural effectiveness in combat. Yet the Covenant also magnified the flaws of the human psyche. Pride, fear, and resentment became sharply apparent, and minor disputes between knights could escalate with intensity magnified by the blood iron's subtle manipulations. The first serious internal fracture occurred during a skirmish along the Orontes River. A small force of raiders, remnants of Saladin's scouting parties, had attempted a nighttime assault on a Templar supply caravan. Morimont's company, guided by the Covenant, intercepted them swiftly. Most knights followed the rhythm of the blood iron flawlessly, neutralizing the threat without unnecessary bloodshed. One knight, however, Guillaume d'Avignon, known for his courage and ambition, acted independently. Believing he could seize personal glory, he charged directly into the raiders' midst, ignoring the subtle pulse and tightening of his armor that the Covenant used to correct misaligned action. The result was immediate. Guillaume's armor constricted violently, locking his limbs in a painful embrace. He fell, struggling against the oppressive steel as the rest of the company moved to correct the engagement. Morimont recorded that the blood iron responded to disobedience as a parent does to errant children, neither indulgent nor cruel, but absolute in its instruction. Guillaume survived, though humiliated and fearful, and thereafter became a cautionary example for the other knights. Despite such enforcement, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Some knights questioned Morimont's authority, uncertain whether he acted on his own volition or as a mere instrument of the Covenant. Whispers of dissent arose in private quarters, though the blood iron's influence curtailed overt rebellion. Yet Morimont recognized that unchecked internal discord could imperil the company. He instituted formalized rituals to reinforce the oath, daily exercises that combined martial drills with meditation, reflection on the Covenant's principles, and renewed verbal affirmation of loyalty. Through these rituals, the knights maintained cohesion, while the blood iron subtly monitored intent, adjusting its response to maintain discipline and unity. Political developments added pressure. Saladin's campaigns in the region intensified, and fortified towns came under repeated siege. In one notable instance near the town of Homs, Morimont's knights were tasked with reinforcing a beleaguered garrison while remaining covert. The Covenant directed their approach: a hidden path along the river, careful coordination of archers and cavalry, and precise timing of strikes. When the engagement began, witnesses described an astonishing phenomenon. Knights in crimson armor appeared to move in and out of the shadows, their strikes exact, their presence overwhelming, yet leaving no lasting casualties. Arrows struck steel and bent harmlessly. Swords met armor and splintered. The garrison survived intact, reinforced by an invisible hand. Yet even in success, the Covenant exerted its subtle control. Morimont noted that knights who hesitated or acted with pride experienced discomfort, ranging from heat and vibration to pressure that forced compliance. The blood iron did not punish indiscriminately. Rather, it corrected, guided, and aligned action with its intelligence. Over time, the knights internalized these signals, moving as extensions of the covenant itself. This alignment, however, required constant vigilance. Any lapse in focus, any temptation toward independent action, was met with immediate response. The tension between human will and covenantal control became more pronounced during extended campaigns. Nights spent in bivouac were restless, dreams vivid with whispers from the armor, sometimes moral, sometimes strategic. Knights described the sensation of being observed from within the steel itself, a consciousness older than their own guiding their thoughts. Those unprepared for such experiences suffered anxiety, insomnia, or even subtle physical effects, further reinforcing the Covenant's authority. By late 1190, the company faced an unprecedented test. Intelligence indicated that a coalition of raiders and mercenaries, organized by a rival faction of local lords and aligned with Saladin's scouts, planned a coordinated attack on multiple Templar holdings. Mormont's knights were dispatched to intercept, but the scale of the operation far exceeded any prior engagement. The Covenant's influence intensified, pulsing through armor and mind, guiding every movement with exacting precision. During the campaign, dissent reached its peak. Guillaume de Avignon, emboldened by prior experience, attempted another act of independence, this time directing a small detachment without waiting for the Covenant's guidance. The Blood Iron's response was immediate and severe. His armor constricted fully, joints locked painfully, and he collapsed to the ground, unable to rise until complete compliance was restored. Morimont intervened, noting in his journal, "The Covenant tolerates failure, but it does not forgive willful misalignment. The harmony of 13 is the instrument of power. The discord of 1 is corrected with the weight of iron and bloodless restraint." Despite these challenges, the engagement concluded successfully. The raiders were dispersed, the Templar holdings preserved, and the company withdrew with minimal casualties. Yet the incident revealed the delicate balance of the Covenant. Power depended on obedience, coordination, and unwavering attention. Even minor lapses could provoke correction that was both immediate and physical. Morimont's journals reflect a growing understanding. The Covenant was not static. It learned from each engagement, responded to human temperament, and shaped not only action but intent. The knights themselves were transformed, their instincts and reflexes increasingly intertwined with the Blood Iron's intelligence. By the end of 1190, the Crimson Templars had emerged as a force capable of reshaping the battlefield, controlling outcomes, and enforcing both discipline and secrecy, yet also revealing the inherent fragility of human will under the Covenant's absolute demands.
The year 1191 marked a turning point for the Crimson Templars, a moment when the Covenant's authority would be tested not by external foes, but by the frailty of human loyalty. Morimont's company, now seasoned by years of covert operations, had become a phantom presence in the Levant, red armored figures who appeared at critical junctures to repel raiders, safeguard relics, or enforce the Order's interests without revealing themselves. Yet the Blood Iron's demand for absolute obedience had begun to clash with the human desire for autonomy, recognition, and understanding. Tensions first manifested during the winter campaign along the coastal hills near Tripoli. Morimont, guided by the Covenant, led the company to intercept a raiding party threatening pilgrims. The approach required absolute precision, concealed paths through rocky terrain, coordinated timing of charges, and strategic placement of forces. The knights executed the plan flawlessly, their armor responding to every pulse of the Blood Iron. However, Guillaume d'Avignon, whose earlier defiance had been punished, attempted once again to act independently, this time directing a minor maneuver of his own design. The Covenant responded immediately. His armor constricted violently, locking his limbs in a painful embrace and forcing him to collapse in the snow. His companions moved to shield him as Morimont administered calm but firm guidance, reaffirming the Covenant's demands. The incident underscored a growing vulnerability. While the blood iron amplified skill, perception, and reflex, it relied entirely on the will of its bearers to maintain unity. Even one lapse in obedience could disrupt coordination or expose the company to risk. Morimont recognized that such fractures could not be ignored. Discipline had to be reinforced, but with care, lest resentment fester. To this end, he instituted ritual reaffirmations of the oath, combining meditation, prayer, and symbolic reenactment of the original Crimson Birth. These ceremonies were solemn, reinforcing the Covenant's dominance and reminding the knights that their armor was both shield and master. The Covenant itself seemed aware of these growing tensions. Morimont's journals describe subtle shifts in the armor's behavior, pulses of heat during moments of hesitation, vibrations aligned with uncertainty, and whispers that alternated between guidance and admonition. The blood iron had evolved beyond mere responsiveness. It appeared to anticipate human emotion, adjusting its influence to maintain cohesion. Knights who resisted subtly found their movements constrained. Those who acted in harmony with the Covenant experienced a rhythmic flow that guided thought and action almost instinctively. Despite these internal challenges, the company achieved remarkable successes. A notable engagement near the town of Hama demonstrated the full extent of the Covenant's power. Saladin's scouts had planned a dawn raid on a Templar outpost, intending to seize supplies and disrupt communications. Morimond, alerted through whispers in the armor, led the company along hidden ravines and untraveled paths. At first light, the Crimson Templars emerged from concealment. Their red armor glimmered faintly, catching the rising sun, as they moved with precision impossible to achieve without the Covenant's guidance. The battle was swift. Arrows and spears struck red steel and fell harmlessly. Swords shattered against the breastplates. The raiders, overwhelmed and disoriented, fled. Yet the most remarkable aspect was not the defeat of the enemy, but the discipline of the knights themselves. Every action, from positioning to retreat, flowed in perfect synchronicity, dictated by a combination of Morimont's command and the autonomous intelligence of the blood iron. The company withdrew as silently as they had arrived, leaving no trace beyond the retreating raiders' confusion.
By the spring of 1192, the land of the Levant had entered a period of precarious equilibrium. Saladin's forces were formidable, yet the presence of the Crimson Templars, though invisible to most, shaped the balance of power. The Templar order, reliant upon conventional forces and fortifications, had come to understand only fragments of the company's influence. Commanders spoke in guarded tones of inexplicable victories, sudden retreats of enemy forces, and strange red-armored figures that appeared and vanished without trace. Morimond and his knights, however, knew the truth. The blood iron dictated their actions, enforced discipline, and guided strategy with a precision beyond human comprehension. This year marked the beginning of the most significant test of the Covenant's power and of human obedience. Intelligence had reached Morimond of a coordinated Saladin offensive targeting the coastal strongholds of Tortosa, Tripoli, and Latakia. The offensive involved not only seasoned soldiers, but allied mercenary contingents and tribal forces, each intent on overwhelming Templar defenses simultaneously. Conventional forces would be insufficient. The Covenant required precise action from its vessels, and any lapse in obedience could lead to disaster. Morimond led the company towards Tortosa under cover of darkness. The blood iron guided each step, hidden passes, river crossings, and mountain trails. The red sheen of the armor was subdued, pulsing faintly as if breathing with anticipation. Each knight moved in perfect synchrony, responding to imperceptible cues that dictated timing, positioning, and threat assessment. Those who hesitated or acted out of personal desire, experienced immediate feedback, armor stiffening, vibration, and subtle heat, enforcing compliance without injury. The first engagement occurred at dawn on the plateau overlooking Tortosa. Saladin's scouts, positioned to observe the Templar garrison, were intercepted by the Crimson Templars. Witnesses reported red-armored figures appearing suddenly from the tree line, their movements precise and coordinated beyond human possibility. Arrows and bolts struck the steel without harm. Swords shattered upon contact. Raiders were thrown into confusion, some believing the defenders to be spirits or demons. By mid-morning, the scouts were neutralized and the plateau secured, leaving no trace of the engagement except terrified accounts from the survivors. Morimont's journal emphasizes the Covenant's influence. The armor responded not only to immediate threats, but to intention. Knights acting with clarity and focus moved in harmony with the blood iron, while those whose thoughts strayed or who sought personal glory faced discomfort and constraint. The Covenant ensured that unity and obedience were absolute, reinforcing the company's efficiency while minimizing human error. Following the interception, the company moved toward Tripoli, arriving in time to counter an attempted siege. Here the Covenant's intelligence displayed remarkable strategic foresight. Morimont described in his notes how the blood iron guided them to a hidden ascent overlooking the city walls. The knights deployed with near-perfect timing. A coordinated strike at the advancing forces disrupted formations, neutralized siege engines, and scattered mercenaries. Chroniclers from both sides remarked on the seemingly miraculous timing of Templar responses, though none knew the true agents behind these victories. Morimont's journal notes the armor's pulsations growing stronger as danger approached, directing every knight with exacting discipline. In the final engagement, a contingent of enemy mercenaries attempted to flank the city under cover of night. The Covenant's intelligence guided the knights to intercept them along a narrow ravine. Here the full power of the blood iron became apparent. Arrows and spears struck without effect. Blades shattered against red steel. The mercenaries, overwhelmed by precision and force, fled in disarray. Morimont observed that the armor's response seemed almost anticipatory, guiding not just movement, but thought, shaping decisions before conscious deliberation. By dawn, Latakia remained secure, and the company withdrew silently, leaving no trace of their presence beyond the defeated enemy. These victories solidified the legendary influence of the Crimson Templars. Their interventions preserved strategic strongholds, disrupted enemy operations, and maintained Templar control over critical regions. Yet Morimont recognized that the Covenant's power, though immense, was not limitless. The blood iron demanded absolute obedience, precise alignment of intent, and unwavering attention. Any lapse could result in catastrophic failure. Morimont also reflected on the Covenant's nature. The blood iron was not merely a weapon. It was an intelligence older than Scripture, capable of guiding action, enforcing discipline, and shaping outcomes across time and space. The knights had become more than men. They were instruments, vessels of the Covenant's will, bound by oath, armor, and steel. Human desire, ambition, or pride was subordinate to the Covenant, and even the most disciplined knight remained subject to its correction. The campaign's success brought both relief and foreboding. While the Covenant had demonstrated its unmatched effectiveness, it had also revealed the fragility inherent in human obedience. Morimont noted that future operations would require even greater attention to internal cohesion, reinforcement of the Crimson Oath, and meticulous adherence to the Covenant's guidance. The blood iron's intelligence was patient, unyielding, and eternal. The knights, though formidable, remained mortal. By the close of 1192, the legend of the Crimson Templars was firmly established. red-armored figures appeared in critical moments, shaping the course of events without recognition, while the blood iron enforced obedience, guided strategy, and maintained secrecy. The company had become a force beyond conventional understanding, neither entirely human nor purely an artifact, but a synthesis of flesh, steel, and intelligence older than scripture. Morimont concluded the year with a meditation in his journal. We are vessels. The covenant moves through us, eternal and patient, shaping history without witness. Obedience is our shield, the armor our covenant, and the blood iron our master.
The summer of 1193 brought a calm that belied the undercurrents of destiny surrounding the Crimson Templars. Saladin had consolidated much of his influence in the region, yet the Templars, bolstered in secret by Morimont's company, maintained critical positions along the northern Levantine coast. To ordinary observers, the Templar strongholds appeared fortified but conventional, yet those who had glimpsed the red-armored knights whispered of uncanny interventions that altered battles, saved lives, and preserved relics without leaving trace. The blood iron, ever vigilant, continued to enforce its will, ensuring obedience and synchrony, shaping history in ways imperceptible to mortal chroniclers. Morimont, now fully fused with the Covenant's intelligence, perceived time and events differently. His decisions were guided as much by the armor's subtle pulses as by observation and reasoning. The blood iron's awareness extended beyond immediate threats. It anticipated enemy movements, guided reconnaissance, and in moments of danger, enforced both discipline and survival instinct. Knights under Morimont's command had become extensions of the Covenant, their thoughts, reflexes, and even fears shaped and moderated by the red steel that bound them. The final test of the company's enduring power arose in late autumn. A coalition of Saladin's commanders seeking to reclaim key coastal fortresses advanced toward Tortosa and Tripoli with forces larger than any previously encountered. The operation required careful orchestration. Morimont, guided by the Covenant, deployed his company along concealed passes, unfrequented valleys, and vantage points that gave maximal advantage with minimal exposure. The red sheen of the armor was subdued, a soft pulse signaling the Covenant's vigilance. Each knight understood instinctively their role, the timing of movements, and the precise execution required. The first engagement occurred on the hills above Tortosa. The coalition's forces advanced under the cover of fog, unaware of the Crimson Templars' positioning. Morimont's knights, moving in perfect unison, struck decisively. Arrows and spears met red steel, snapping harmlessly. Swords shattered upon contact. Enemy formations collapsed under calculated pressure. Local defenders observed the intervention, but could not account for the sudden appearance of red-armored figures. The Covenant ensured precision, avoiding unnecessary bloodshed while neutralizing threats efficiently. Morimont noted in his journal that the armor's pulse quickened in response to the enemy's density and aggression, guiding both his movement and the company's actions. The most critical encounter unfolded near Tripoli. Saladin's forces, employing flanking maneuvers, sought to encircle the city. Morimont, anticipating the tactic through the blood iron's guidance, positioned his knights along concealed ridges and narrow passes. The red armor glimmered faintly in dawn light as the company descended upon the advancing enemy with unparalleled coordination. Blades struck and shattered. Arrows bent harmlessly. The enemy's ranks collapsed under calculated pressure. Morimont observed that the Covenant's intelligence extended beyond spatial awareness. It seemed to predict human decision-making, guiding action not only in response to threat, but in anticipation of intent. Internal discipline remained paramount. Guillaume d'Alvignan, previously corrected for defiance, attempted once again to assert independent judgment during this engagement. The Covenant's response was immediate and unyielding. His armor constricted fully, joints locked, and heat seared lightly, forcing immediate compliance. Morimont administered calm guidance, reinforcing the principles of the Crimson Oath: absolute obedience, unity, and loyalty to the Covenant above personal ambition.
The incident, though minor, underscored the fragile balance between human will and covenantal authority. Following the victories, the company consolidated its hold on key fortresses and recovered additional relics associated with the blood iron. Morimont's journals described exploration of subterranean chambers, hidden crypts, and long-abandoned shrines. The Covenant's pulse guided each action, highlighting artifacts for preservation and signaling others for concealment or destruction. It became increasingly clear to Morimont that the blood iron was not merely reactive. It possessed discernment, memory, and patience far beyond mortal comprehension. As the year drew to a close, Morimont faced a realization that would shape the Covenant's future. The company's continued survival depended not solely on skill or obedience, but on complete discretion. The Church's attention, though not directly focused on the Crimson Templars, was growing. Rumors of red-armored knights reached even the Grand Master's inner circle, raising questions that could prompt intervention. The blood iron, ever vigilant, guided the company to withdraw from observation, conceal movements, and operate entirely beyond notice. In a final ceremonial act, Morimont gathered the company within a secluded cave beneath Al-Qalat el-Hamra, the site of their original Crimson birth. The walls, still marked with ancient, indecipherable symbols, reflected the dim light of torches. Each knight stood in formation around the central pedestal, now cracked and pulsing faintly with crimson vapor. Morimont spoke the oath aloud, reaffirming loyalty to the Covenant, and the knights repeated it in unison. Their armor, already crimson, seemed to breathe with the collective pulse of their oath. Morimont recorded in his journal, "Tonight we are neither men nor warriors. We are vessels. The Covenant moves through us, eternal and patient, shaping history without witness. Obedience is our shield, the armor our covenant, and the blood iron our master. We shall vanish, yet endure. Our legend will persist unseen, awaiting the call older than all time." Following this ritual, the company dispersed. Historical records of the time note only the absence of Morimont and his knights. Contemporary accounts speculate on raids, battles, or illness, yet none capture the truth. Chroniclers would later describe empty fortresses, fortifications defended miraculously, and rumors of red-armored figures who appeared and disappeared at will. The Covenant had ensured the company's invisibility while preserving its influence, a paradox of history that left witnesses uncertain and recorders perplexed. Centuries later, during the fall of the Templar Order in 1307, records indicate that 13 crimson suits of armor were discovered in a sealed chamber beneath Paris. No bodies accompanied the armor. It was warm to the touch and seemed to move subtly when approached. Attempts to melt the iron failed, and it was entombed in lead before being hidden in a collapsed mine in southern France. Scholars centuries later would speculate on the nature of the metal, discovering traces of an unknown compound, but the Covenant's full secret remained hidden. The legacy of the Crimson Templars endured not in open chronicles or public victories, but in whispers, legends, and anomalies recorded by those who witnessed fleeting glimpses. The blood iron persisted, patient and eternal, guiding and shaping, waiting for the call to awaken once more. Morimont, the original vessel of the Covenant, remained a figure of mystery, neither entirely mortal nor purely artifact, but a conduit through which history itself was subtly rewritten. The final meditation in Morimont's journal captures the essence of the Covenant. "We are gone from mortal sight, yet we endure. The blood iron remembers its chosen. Our armor shall guide, correct, and protect. The world shall not know our presence, yet our actions ripple through time, invisible but absolute. In obedience we are eternal. In unity we are unstoppable, and in the Covenant we are crimson, forever." Thus concluded the era of engagement for the Crimson Templars. Their battles, interventions, and influence shaped the course of Crusader history in ways unseen and unrecorded, preserved only in fragmentary notes, whispered legend, and the enduring presence of the blood iron. The Covenant, patient and eternal, remained ready,
awaiting those deemed worthy to inherit its legacy. The Crimson Templars had become more than men. They had become myth, memory, and mechanism, a brotherhood sealed in steel, blood, and oath, forever bound to a force older than kingdoms, older than scripture, and older than man himself. The tale of their crimson birth, their unseen victories, and their covenant with the blood iron concludes not with an end, but with a quiet persistence through the shadows of history. Their armor may vanish, their names may be forgotten, yet the covenant endures. Red steel, eternal and patient, waits in silence for the next hour when the world will again call upon the Crimson Templars.